It started with a zipper. Not mine. Not his. Just the slow, quiet sound of my wedding dress slipping off the hanger, the soft metal teeth parting like a secret being opened too soon. I stood there barefoot in my living room, a glass of wine in one hand, my other trembling slightly as I held the hanger like it might bite me. And he was watching. Ethan. My best friend since college. My fiancé's best man. The one I asked insisted really should be our witness because it would mean the world. I wasn't thinking about the way his eyes had followed me all evening. I wasn't thinking about how he never quite looked at me the same way anymore. I was only thinking about the fact that the wedding was 2 days away and I still didn't feel like a bride. I felt off. Not sad, not nervous. Just strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. And when Ethan showed up with a bottle of red and a crooked smile, I let him in because I needed something familiar. Something that didn't expect me to sparkle. We talked. Laughed. We'd done that 1,000 times. But this time it felt different. The air got heavier, or maybe my skin just got too warm. Somewhere between glass 2 and 3, I sat too close on the couch, or he didn't move away. I don't remember which. What I do remember is the way he looked at me when I leaned over to grab a blanket. Like he'd been holding something back for years and he was starting to lose. And then he said it barely above a whisper. You don't love him the way you think you do. I froze. He didn't say it like a question. He said it like a truth he'd carried so long it had begun to hurt. I turned to him slowly, wine catching in my chest. I expected a grin, a joke, some Ethan-style save. But there was nothing playful in his face. Only hunger. Only ache. Only everything I hadn't let myself see. And just like that, the ground shifted. I laughed. A nervous, brittle sound like glass cracking under pressure. Don't do that, I said too quickly. Don't make this into something it's not. But Ethan didn't blink. Didn't move. He just sat there, one elbow resting on his knee, his gaze steady, maddeningly calm. You know I'm right, he said. You've been pretending. You keep pretending. But your body, your eyes, they're exhausted from it. I felt every word like a slow unraveling. My throat tightened. He's good to me, I murmured, more to myself than to him. I'm not saying he isn't. Ethan's voice was low, careful. But I've seen the way you look when you talk about him. You don't light up. You dim. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the heat creeping up my neck, the flush of something I didn't want to name. Shame? Guilt? Or the terrifying pull of being seen too clearly? You don't get to do this right now, I whispered. Not 2 days before. Why not? He said, and suddenly his voice cracked. Why not now when it's almost too late? When you're about to give yourself away, forever, to someone you're not even sure about. His hands were shaking. Ethan never shook. I stared at them, at the way his fingers curled into fists, knuckles pale. I had known those hands for a decade, helping me move apartments, fixing my busted sink, catching my tears without needing explanations. I knew them in the innocent way you know a friend. But now they looked like they could ruin me. He reached forward slowly, carefully, like the moment was made of glass. His fingers brushed mine. Just that, a touch. But my breath caught like it had snagged on something sharp. The warmth of his skin, the slight tremble, the way his eyes searched mine like he was asking a question he already knew the answer to. I didn't pull away. And that was the moment everything changed. Because not pulling away, that was its own kind of betrayal. One I couldn't undo. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My voice felt trapped somewhere deep in my chest, behind everything I was trying to ignore. The touch of his hand on mine wasn't demanding. It wasn't even intentional, not fully. But it lingered. And in that lingering, something ancient and forbidden stirred. Ethan didn't move closer. He didn't have to. The space between us changed. It thickened, pulled tight like a drawn breath that never exhaled. I looked at our hands, barely touching, and still felt like the entire room had shifted around them. My skin buzzed where he touched me, nerves rising like a tide. I shouldn't be here, he said, voice like warm velvet. But I couldn't stay away. My heart ached. Not out of guilt, not yet. It ached because I knew that feeling. I'd lived it. The longing for something you couldn't admit, even to yourself. I'd buried so much under the title of best friend. But titles don't keep hands from trembling. What are we doing? I whispered, afraid of the answer. Ethan leaned back just enough to look at me fully. His eyes were darker now, like something had surfaced, something he'd been hiding behind casual grins and deflections. You tell me, he said softly. Because you haven't let go either. And I realized, with a pang of truth I hadn't expected, that I hadn't. My hand was still under his. My thumb was tracing a line across his skin, slowly, absently, like it had a mind of its own. I pulled away then, but it was too late. The charge in the air had already changed us. I'm marrying him, Ethan. He stood. And for a moment I thought he was leaving. But he didn't. He walked behind the couch, paced once, and stopped. Do you remember last summer? He asked suddenly. I frowned. What about it? When we went hiking in Big Sur. You twisted your ankle. We stayed in that cabin because you couldn't walk. You cried when you thought I couldn't hear you. The memory hit me like a wave. I almost kissed you that night, he said, steady. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I didn't. Because you weren't mine. My heart slammed. But now, he said quietly, you're almost his. And I think that's worse. And then he stepped forward slowly, deliberately, until he was in front of me. He didn't touch me this time. He just looked. Waited. And I realized something I hadn't dared admit. I didn't want him to stop me. Not this time. I should have stood up. Should have said something clear and grown up like, we can't do this, or I need you to leave. But instead, I just sat there, breathing him in, feeling every inch of silence between us tremble like it was alive. Ethan looked at me like I was a puzzle he'd already solved, like my walls were glass and every secret I thought I'd hidden had been in plain sight all along. Say something, he murmured, voice thick with restraint. But I couldn't. Because the only words I had left would have been confessions. Dangerous ones. Like how I'd thought about him the night I got engaged. How I sometimes caught myself wondering what it would feel like to wake up next to him. How my heart fluttered when I heard his name, even when I didn't want it to. He leaned in just enough that I felt his breath against my cheek. He didn't kiss me. Didn't rush. He just hovered there, letting the heat between us speak louder than any words ever could. Tell me to stop, he whispered. I didn't. My hands moved before my mind did, fingers brushing against his chest, uncertain at first. His body stiffened, then relaxed, like he'd been holding back a storm. His hand came to rest on my jaw, not pulling me in, just there grounding me. And I tilted forward. Our foreheads touched first. Then the side of our noses. Everything slowed, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When our lips finally met, it wasn't fireworks. It was gravity. A slow, aching fall into something we'd both been circling for years. His mouth was warm and unsure at first, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. And I felt like my entire body had turned into a wire strung too tight. He pulled back just an inch, eyes wide, searching. I've waited so long for this, he said, his voice cracking. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up. So I kissed him again, because words didn't make sense anymore, not with the way my skin was humming, not with the way my heart was betraying every promise I'd made. Clothes stayed on. But his hands, the way they moved over my back, my shoulders, brushing hair from my face, it felt like worship. Like apology and desire all tangled together. I clung to him, to the moment, to the unbearable rightness of being exactly where I wasn't supposed to be. And somewhere in the back of my mind, something small and terrified whispered, you can't come back from this. We didn't rush. We didn't tear at each other like in the movies. There was no fevered chaos. Just a kind of slow, reverent unraveling, like every inch of space we touched had been waiting to be discovered for years. Ethan kissed me like it hurt to do anything else. And I kissed him back like I didn't care what came next. There were moments, fleeting, suspended, where I thought I might cry. Not out of guilt, not even out of fear. But from the strange, aching grief of something that should have happened long ago. Something that had been waiting quietly behind every almost touch, every look too long, every swallowed word. His hands mapped me gently, like he was learning me in a language only we understood. And mine gripped his shoulders tighter than I meant to, as if I needed something real to anchor me through the storm of my own want. I remember the sound of our breathing, tangled, uneven, desperate in its own quiet way. I remember the way his forehead rested against mine, how his thumbs brushed along my waist like he was memorizing me. And I remember the moment we stopped, not because we were done, but because it had become too much. Too real. I lay there with him afterward, the room still smelling of red wine and warm skin, the air heavy with what we'd just done, and not done. Because we hadn't gone too far, but we had already gone far enough. His arm draped loosely over me, but he didn't speak. Neither did I. We just stared at the ceiling like it held answers we didn't want. Eventually he whispered, do you regret it? I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes because it was safe, because it was what I was supposed to say. But I couldn't. No, I said, barely audible. Do you? His silence was his answer. And when he finally pulled me closer, I let him, even though I knew, deep in the hollow of my chest, that something had just broken. Something that couldn't be put back together with a wedding. Not anymore. I woke to the smell of coffee. For a second, just one blissfully blank second, I forgot where I was. I stretched, sighed, and turned toward the warmth beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then I remembered. Ethan. The living room. The soft blanket tangled between us. My body still humming with the echoes of the night before. I sat up slowly, heart thudding against my ribs, like my own body was demanding answers I couldn't give. He was in the kitchen, barefoot, shirt wrinkled, 2 mugs in his hands. When he looked at me, his face softened, like the storm had passed, but the wreckage was still fresh. "Morning," he said gently. I couldn't respond. I just looked at him, this man who had been my friend, my safe place, my witness, and now something else entirely. He handed me a mug. Our fingers brushed. Even that tiny touch was too much. "I should go," I said, voice cracking. "Don't," he said quietly. "Ethan, please don't make this harder." But he wasn't listening. Not really. His eyes were somewhere else. Somewhere deeper. He sat across from me, setting his coffee down without drinking it. "You know what last night meant," he said. "Don't pretend it didn't." I looked away. "I'm supposed to marry him," I whispered. He didn't blink. "And I'm supposed to stand beside you and pretend I've never loved you." The words hit like a punch. I couldn't breathe. "You what?" He leaned in, eyes blazing, not with anger, but with something more dangerous, certainty. "I've loved you since sophomore year. Since the night you got drunk at that Halloween party and fell asleep on my shoulder and called me your favorite person in the world." I covered my mouth. "I thought I could live with just being near you," he said, voice low. "But then he came along. And I watched you drift toward him, thinking maybe I'd get over it. But I never did." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. My hands trembled. "You're not saying this because of last night," I whispered. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm saying it because I can't let you marry him without knowing the truth. Not after what we felt. Not after the way you looked at me." I stared at him, every part of me torn and unraveling. Because he was right. And that truth, the one I'd buried under layers of should and safety, was finally clawing its way to the surface. The dress never made it back on the hanger. It lay there across the couch, like a ghost of the life I'd almost chosen. The life that looked perfect on paper. The one everyone else believed in except me. I didn't show up at the church. I wish I could say I left a grand note, made some dramatic gesture, explained everything. But I didn't. I just disappeared. Not forever. Just long enough to catch my breath. To admit the truth to myself before I let anyone else hear it. Ethan waited outside my apartment all morning. He didn't text. Didn't call. Just waited, like he knew I needed silence before I could speak. When I finally opened the door, my hands were still shaking. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. I just fell into his arms. And for the first time, it didn't feel like I was betraying anyone. It felt like coming home. He didn't ask me to explain. He didn't ask for anything. He just held me, forehead resting against mine, the way he had that night, like he was still catching his breath from everything we hadn't dared say for years. "I ruined everything," I whispered into his chest. "No," he murmured, "you finally told the truth." The fallout came, of course. Tears. Anger. So many questions from friends, family, people who couldn't understand why a wedding so carefully planned could fall apart in a night. But they didn't see the way I looked at Ethan when no one was watching. The way he looked at me. Sometimes you don't realize what you've been starving for until someone finally feeds you the truth. And sometimes you don't need vows or a ring to know when something's real.